Hey everybody, happy Monday. Now today we're going to be talking about how long you should spend studying a language every single day. Now, I often see this being given a very simple response, and I will do that, but the value I hope to add in this video is actually looking at a more nuanced approach to both the question and the response. Okay, so before we jump in, if you like this channel, if you're enjoying my videos, then please do consider subscribing. And I want to say a massive thank you to my new Patreon supporters. We're up to 20 people now. So if you're one of those people, please do check out the page this week as I'll be posting a Patreon exclusive language learning diary update, my very first entry. So let's just jump straight in. It is very often said that, you can actually learn a language in a surprisingly small amount of time if you do it every day. I myself have said this, and we've discussed some really interesting points about building habits. I highly recommend that you check out my video, my best tip for maintaining languages, and also my best tip for how to build a new language habit. But what I want to do now is talk a little bit more about the nuance of this answer. Because it's one thing to say, it's fine. 30 minutes a day, you're good. And I find a lot of people who give that advice are polyglots or language learning enthusiasts who tend to actually spend a lot more time than that on their language learning, right? So what I have found through my recent experiment, and I say recent, but I've been doing this for almost 2 years now, learning Mandarin Chinese as an extremely busy person and trying to go through the process of learning this language in a more realistic way for most people. And so that has often been 30 minutes per day or maybe 1 hour maximum. Now I am spending more time on Mandarin Chinese now, but that's actually because I'm starting to reach higher levels. And so that actually opens up more opportunities to use dead time. I'm a huge proponent of dead time. I have a whole 2 chapters in my book all about it. So I think that dead time is very valuable, but you end up with many more ways to use that dead time for language learning as you get more advanced. So in the first stages of learning Mandarin, it really was often just 30 minutes a day. Now, what I found out through going through that process was that the less you study every day, the more important the question becomes of what should you actually do in that time. So what I found is that in the past, I would dedicate hours upon hours upon hours to my languages every day. And so it often didn't really matter what I did at any given time or any given 30-minute block, because when you spend that much time studying a language every day, you can sort of overcompensate for deficiencies in your methodology or maybe doing things that aren't working terribly well because you're just spending so much time that it starts to become less important exactly what you may do between 10 o'clock and 10:30 or between 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock. And so I think that even myself in my earlier years, I may have given the advice that it really doesn't matter too much what you do as long as you spend that 30 minutes every day. And if you can spend 1 hour per day learning a language, I think you're golden. But like I said, I think that while that is still true, a more nuanced response will serve the learner well. Because if you only have 30 minutes a day, well, we need to start thinking about what are you going to do in that 30 minutes? So you have to start thinking about how are you going to cultivate a balanced skill set in that language over the period of time if you're going to just be doing 30 minutes a day. So if you only do listening to a podcast for 30 minutes every single day for 1 year or 2 years, well, of course, you're going to start to really develop your listening skills and, you will expand your vocabulary, but are you going to be able to speak? Are you going to be able to write? Are you going to really develop a strong command of grammatical structures or things like this? Well, probably not, especially if you're mostly passive listening, where you're just kind of taking things in. And so I think what we have to think about is if we're going to only spend 30 minutes a day, how can we vary our activities in the language? How can we do things in a way that we make sure we develop a structured and sort of balanced set of skills? Now, it is fair to say that this may change over time. So I am a pretty heavily input-based learner in the initial phases of language learning, and I know many people in my audience are that way too. And there are also lots of people who prefer speaking more from the beginning. It really depends. I would say my approach is pretty balanced. I can talk a lot more about that because I think my approach is actually kind of interesting because I am heavily input-based, but I also do a lot of speaking to myself quite near the beginning. But the purpose is actually not necessarily to become good at speaking. It's that I find it actually helps me to front load that a little bit because it helps me to get a good grasp of the grammatical structures specifically. So I find that through doing certain activities and certain drills that are more output based, it helps me to really grasp the grammatical structure and a sort of framework for the language. Then I go into a much more sort of input heavy phase because now I feel more comfortable with those structures and so on. So we could talk more about that later, but the main point I want to get at here is that whatever your goal is, if your goal in this particular phase of learning is mostly input, we should still think about, okay, you should probably be doing some passive and some active input. So it's not enough to just say, okay, cool, 30 minutes a day, that's what everybody says, okay, or even 1 hour per day. Everybody says 1 hour a day is enough, so I'm just going to listen passively. But it's also not good to only do an incredibly active study, right? Where you're never actually getting that sort of, exposure to natural language, or you're never really testing your skills. You're only, listening, pausing. You're gonna cover a lot less ground. So again, no matter what your approach is, no matter what you're focusing on in a given moment or a given phase of learning, I think that you should think about, okay, given the time that I have, let's say it's 30 minutes for our first example. Well, I need to make sure that A, I accomplish my goal in a balanced way in this particular phase of learning. So again, let's say that you're not really focused on speaking right now, you're mostly focused on comprehension. Well, we got to think about reading comprehension and listening comprehension. Again, we have to think about active versus passive, or maybe extensive versus intensive for reading, right? So it's not enough to only say, okay, cool, 30 minutes, whatever. You should probably think about some kind of a rotation system, and you could actually reference my video or my book where I wrote about my sort of three-tiered prioritized rotation system. And so this might look like, cool, I've got 30 minutes a day, maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm going to focus on, active listening. And then Tuesday, Thursday, I'll focus on more passive listening. And on the weekends, I'm gonna really dig into some reading activities. And that's how I'll sort of spread my activities across the week. If you have 1 hour, you can expand this. And again, like I said, the more time you spend per day on a language, the less important it becomes on exactly what you might be doing or specifically which method. Again, the main value I wanna give you in this video is just to be aware that, again, it's all well and good for polyglots or language enthusiasts who are spending 6 or 7 hours a day learning languages to say, just 30 minutes a day, if you do that, you're golden, make the daily habit. But like I said, I was very surprised when I finally actually stepped into the shoes of the sort of typical language learner, the best that I could. And even for me, as someone who's extremely, passionate about language learning, very experienced, I've done this over and over again, I was really surprised at how important it was to think critically about what I'm studying and what I'm doing and how I'm practicing that language on a daily basis. In the past, I would be like, cool, this book isn't perfect, but it'll get me there. I'll do it for a couple hours a day. I'll finish it before long. But when you're only doing a really small amount every day, well, it might take you 6 months to get through that textbook, for example. So all of a sudden, if you're spending 6 months on a resource that's not really helping and isn't really a good match, well, that could be quite catastrophic for your overall trajectory. Whereas if I have that same textbook it's not really a good match. I'm getting some value from it. If I'm gonna blast through that in a few weeks, then maybe I just go for it. And if it turns out that it wasn't a good choice, I'll self-correct and I'll go down a different path. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. Again, we could talk at more length. If you have any questions about any specific thing I mentioned today, let's talk about it. Ask me in the comments and I'll be happy to make videos on it. I'd love to get some discussion going. But yeah, the general message here is I do think that you can learn a new language in 30 minutes a day if you really do make it a daily habit. I've talked before about how the most important thing is make sure you get exposure every single day. Anything is so much better than nothing. That is true. And again, if you tend to say, all right, I'm gonna do 10 minutes, right? Oftentimes you'll do 30 minutes or you'll do 1 hour. So the most important thing truly is just do it every single day. And as I said in my tip for how to build a new language habit, the best way to start is actually just commit to 10 minutes a day, commit to 15 minutes a day. Because again, the most important thing is sitting down and doing it. And over time, you'll notice that you're just naturally spending 30 minutes or 1 hour, and then you're golden, right? But again, once we've got past that, once we've said, okay, cool, we are gonna try to do it every day. We're gonna make sure we get at least 30 minutes. 1 hour is truly golden. Well, it is helpful to think about, again, what am I focusing on right now? And how can I do that in a balanced way? But make sure you have a bigger vision. And so if your goal is input learning right now, but one day I would like to make sure I become a fluent speaker. Well, think about that, right? It doesn't have to be too concrete, but maybe think about, okay, if I'm gonna keep doing this for just 30 minutes a day, well, how am I gonna eventually get to actually doing speaking? And so I'm gonna have to eventually rotate my activities around. But do also keep in mind, like I said, I have found that the more advanced you get, all of a sudden, so many things open up. So maybe you could actually just listen to a podcast while you're on a walk and your listening comprehension is good enough to where you can actually get value from that. So that becomes your dead time activity. And then when you have that 30 minutes of dedicated study time, you can use that doing other things, right? Or maybe when your speaking skills get pretty good, you could talk to yourself while driving and you can describe your surroundings and whatever you want. Maybe you start to actually build friendships in the language, and so you're able to have conversational practice more regularly. Again, the better you get, the more you'll be able to make time in your dead time, which can alleviate your dedicated study time. But yeah, anyway, that was a bit of a ramble, but I hope it was helpful. I think it's kind of an interesting topic and I would love to get your thoughts. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, please do consider giving it a like, maybe even a subscribe if you're not already. And I'll see you back here on Wednesday for another video.